jumping into All About Eve, do you remember the first time you saw this film?
No, I've seen it so many times. I could practically act it out.
Yeah, I've
No.
seen it. I've seen it a number of times as well. What do you think the essence of the story is? What do you think? What does it mean to you?
Well, first of all, one of my favorite plays in life is The Importance of Being Earnest because it's so witty. You know, you're
Yeah,
always enjoying those lines. And The Importance of Being Eve, oh, okay, All
that's a
About
sequel.
Eve is as witty, but the characters are real characters. They're not just mouthpieces for witty lines like in Oscar Wilde's. And so
Yes,
it's
yes,
very much a touching drama and comedy that you follow, a comedy of manners that which
yeah.
so I thought it was very touching, and Joe put a lot of work into each of the three characters, and it was very interesting to see them develop. And of course, it's hard to imagine anyone but the three actresses who played them playing them now, even though casting
Yes,
just evolved. So
yes.
aging, etc. And Joe was proudest of Karen, the wife,
Mm,
Lloyd's wife, the wife too. And he wrote a lot about that plight of a wife, of somebody in this kind of business being powerless as her husband is surrounded by, aspiring, gorgeous women and a new crop all the time, even though
right.
his wife at the time was in that plight, and it didn't stop him from having affairs and treating her horribly and everything. So he understood it. He just didn't change his behavior to
Right.
adapt
Right.
to it.
That's yeah, that's true. I didn't connect the two. Yeah, he mentions that in the book. It's like the wife who was there for the struggling artist when they were struggling, and then when they became successful, they feel now that they have no place that they're. And you saw that with Karen in the voiceover where she says, maybe he's too used to me now, and she feels like she was going to those rehearsals when Eve was playing Cora, then she eventually just stopped going because what am I doing here? I feel useless, as she said, which I found that really interesting as well about her. What I like so much about the film is this element of Bette Davis and her concern with the aging, with her aging, and he really goes deep into that. Like, it's, you see the anxiety and you see her anger and you see her insecurities, and that she was drinking heavily at the party, the cocktail party that they throw. And I found that really appealing, and the fact that she also has a younger boyfriend, right? And so she's worried that he'll, right away he's going to Hollywood, and she says, right, oh well, don't meet too many young starlets or something along those lines. But he doesn't just kind of simplify it. Like, she's really struggling with that throughout the entire film, to the point where her boyfriend, played by Gary Merrill, has to like shake her on the bed, and at
Mhm.
that, when she finds out that Eve is going to be the understudy. I really appreciated that he didn't want to just make it easy on the audience. Like, he makes it quite rough, but then yet funny at the same time. I mean,
Right.
it's like you said, like, the lines are not just witty; they really inform who these people are psychologically. I had mentioned that when I had reviewed House of Strangers. Like, it just seems like everything that these people say, even though it's funny, it just seems exactly what a person
Yes.
like that would say. So I don't know where he got it, but then it has a poetic feel too at times. Like, when Eve is telling that story about the theater that she was involved in at home, and because she was not happy, and she said it was like a drop of rain in the desert. I thought, what a great line.
Well, one of the things he prided himself, he and Herman were both really good at dialogue.
Yeah,
It's just Joe also
absolutely.
put the work into structure and character too. But he took pride in being able to write dialogue for the character. Karen was a Radcliffe graduate, so Karen had a certain syntax and way of speaking that Margot Bertie Coonan, the maid, Thelma Ritter,
Oh
the
yeah.
dresser, I guess, was a vaudevillian. So she would have lines like, the dog's yapping at her rear end, which, by the way, I don't know what word he originally wanted, but the censors didn't want him to use rear. I don't know what they
Oh
wanted.
God.
And so forth. And Margot was, very dramatic. And so yes, dialogue was his forte.
Yeah. Yeah. No, him and Herman both were brilliant then with dialogue. And just as you mentioned, every character is so distinctive. But from that first scene in the dressing room backstage when Eve comes in, particularly, it popped out to be the most between Thelma Ritter and Bette Davis was this sense of history in their relationship, like the banter back and forth. You never felt that it was just out of cruelty and that she's this woman who works for her who's like being, pushed around. You sense that they were friends, that they had a banter between them, that maybe there were certain things about each other that they couldn't stand, but that they really cared and loved for each other. That also comes down to just how good those actors are, I think, where they were able to really make that life and that dialogue come alive so well. I just thought it was breathtaking.
Thelma Ritter's part for Thelma Ritter. He loved her. She was already in a Letter to Three Wives, and
that's right.
So I guess that's the one person who he wrote it with her in mind. And as you know, it was supposed to be Claudette Colbert. They had hired 20th Century Fox had hired her to be Margot, and then she hurt her back.
That's right.
Movie. And Joe always said, because no one can imagine anyone but Bette Davis as Margot. And he said she would have been fine. It just would have been a different Margot. Yes, and all of them. I mean, you were touching on that first scene. It's so much about acting, because Eve is acting, she's playing a part, and then little by little she comes out. Margot is on, she's theatrical, but that's her personality, but she's also performing and so forth. So to watch them acting, that we're watching them acting is really fun. It's layers of so forth. And Joe absolutely had, as Joe, the director, knew how he wanted every line spoken. So he, obviously he let them put what they could into it, but he had a vision of how he wanted, which is why he went into directing, to protect what he'd written.
Mm-hmm. Was he that specific with actors in terms of?
Well, I think he would say, like Bette Davis, when they first met beforehand for dinner, and she said, tell me about my character. And he said, she's the kind of dame who'd use her fur coat as a poncho. And that was all she needed. Right. So of course she put into it, but there were certainly times when he did, I want this emphasis.
Okay.
And so forth.
Okay.
And there was one of the things I saw at the Academy was Joe and Claudette Colbert in New York doing some presentations at another Academy Awards. And when Joe spoke, he spoke so articulately with such emphasis. I knew he had written his own lines, and this is exactly how he wanted them delivered, so everybody would hear every word, just the way he wanted. So yes.
He directs himself.
Yes.
That's really interesting. You just brought up something about this element of performance in the film, that everyone is to an extent acting, in the characters are acting. And I like how there's a lot of it's almost as if everyone else is aware of that because of the theater comments. For example, DeWitt, the critic, he when he's on the steps, the scene after the cocktail party, and then Bette Davis is getting really angry at everybody, and she storms upstairs, and then he says, "Oh, we're gonna miss Act 3. They're deciding to play it off stage." I just thought that's brilliant. It's like, and I know as myself, as an actor and who's worked in theater, it's true. I mean, there always is these references to life mirroring art and art mirroring life, and you constantly in the film there's all these, and I just thought, wow, he really nailed that.
Well, first of all, Bette Davis thought her career was over.
That's right. Yeah.
And so she was rescued by this. She said he rescued it. Second of all, Bette Davis and Gary Merrill fell in love while
That's right.
This.
Yeah.
And he was younger than she too. And Joe did make the director younger to make it even more complicated for her aging, to one more strike on aging. So they were both married to other people, but they had a mad affair during production and managed to get rid of their spouses and get married before the movie came out. They worked fast. And in fact, the marriage only lasted 10 years. And Bette Davis did say he married Margot Channing and he got Bette Davis.
That's
so it's
just
very
like,
much
yeah,
life following art.
which
Yeah.
is what she was saying in the book. Wow, I mean,
Yeah.
in the film. Wow, that's incredible. Eve. What's interesting with Eve, and I thought Anne Baxter was actually quite good. She almost felt like something out of a film noir, like a femme fatale type. This woman who's up to no good and is calculated, doing all these, has these calculated moves. But what I love the scene with her and DeWitt played by George Sanders towards the end, when he basically learns about all that she's lied about her past. She's lied about what her real name is, the blackmailing. He finds out about how she tried to blackmail Karen into playing Cora, that she's been lying this whole time. And he says, you belong to me. And that's really when you see her facade fall, and she cracks and falls on the bed defeated. And then I couldn't help but feel bad for her when he says, you belong to me now, and she says yes. And I just thought, yes, because she felt that now he was blackmailing her. And I just thought, wow, I don't know how you felt about her in this film. I thought she was really good.
Oh, I thought she was wonderful. And her voice changes, everything changes.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Interestingly, when I've listened to some of her interviews, Anne Baxter has kind of a breathy, actressy manner about her. And Zanuck they had publicly announced that Jean Crane was going to play that role. And Joe did not like Jean Crane as an actress. He had directed her in A Letter to Three Wives, and he thought she was too good. She was too calm. And it was that scene that in the New Haven hotel room where they were fighting killer to killer, champion to champion. It's a fabulous scene. And he felt wonderful. That was out of Jean Crane's range. And so he suggested Anne Baxter, who happened to be under contract, so it wasn't going to cost the studio anymore. And so Daryl Zanuck was amenable to that. But he also found, in directing that scene, Anne Baxter said, "I'm a horse that runs all out from the first try." So she was giving it her all as they were doing take after take. And George Sanders, who evidently was very lazy and liked to sleep in between when he was in a scene, was kind of lethargic, and Joe had to keep doing it over and over to get his energy level up. But yes, you see her broken in that scene.
Yeah.
And all the subsequent scenes with Eve, she's, like it's empty, it's over. And even though she's gotten everything she wants, you don't see her, she's not enjoying it.
No, not at all. Which is the classic last scene, of course, with the young woman Phoebe, who's now another Eve, and that shot, that look in the mirror, of course, that last shot where you see a reflection of Phoebe.
Did you like that? Some people think it's corny.
I love it.
Some people think it's, it was de trop, or as Celeste, as Karen said, de trop.
No, I love it. I think it's visually stunning, and it says so much about show business in general. Just about this. There always is going to be someone who is so ambitious that they were willing to kick you to the curb,
yes,
to get a job. And she even has the line, Eve, to Karen when she blackmails her, of course, because as we suffer, anyone who hasn't seen the film, just to put it in context, was Karen called her and they worked out this plan to empty the gas out of the car when they went on this cottage weekend, so that Margot would miss the matinee, so that way Eve would go on. So she uses it to blackmail her into making sure she gets her husband to give her the role to play Cora. And that line that she has when I forget exactly what Karen says, but she says, how could you how could you do this? And she goes, I would, I would go a lot. I would do much more for a part that good. I just thought, wow.
Right. Right.
You know, but that's again, it's not just a great line. It just said so much about the essence of that person who is so driven and will almost kill or ruin to, as Duet calls her, killer to killer, you know,
Right.
like
Right.
they'll and he's similar in the sense that he will do anything for a great story, you know, like he knew that he had, well, you don't know how much he knows early on. Like he sees Eve coming on to um Gary Merrill, and and then he's obviously, you don't know what he knows at that point, but he catches her in a lie about the theaters in San Francisco.
Yeah, he sets her up. I think when they go out to dinner, he grills her and then he does the research and so forth.
That's right, yeah. And then
So he, and
and then
that way he was supposed to be Jose Ferrer, and for whatever reason, Jose Ferrer couldn't do it. And Joe was fine with George Sanders, who
yeah,
is so good.
he's great. He's brilliant. Just the voice, the attitude, the behavior, the cigarette out of the cigarette holder. It's brilliant. I love the way he looked at Phoebe towards the end when he said, "What's your name?" and she looked down and
Right.
said Phoebe, as if to say. And then he was kind of suspicious, and I think he probably thought you're lying. That's what I took from it,
Right,
anyways.
he
Like,
did.
yeah,
She said, "Well, then that's what I call myself." So,
yeah,
it's clearly another Eve.
yeah. Like he just he was able to suss these people out because he probably could see them in himself, because he was like I said, he was someone who you don't see him particularly close with anyone, any relation. Every relationship he has seems to be because that person's going to get something out of him, or vice versa. You see that with when Marilyn Monroe character, she's there with him because there's going to be producers at the party. You
Well,
know,
yes, and he's the Joe mouthpiece. Joe started with A Letter to Three Wives with the Kirk Douglas character, telling a lot of Joe's opinions. So he used Addison DeWitt, which is DeWitt, sort of like Mankiewicz, and Addison, the evil.
oh right,
He had fun, it's sort of Dickensian, all the names that he chose. But he talked about the theater. A lot of what Addison says, oh, well, actually, a lot of what Gary Merrill also says when he gives Eve that lecture in the first time they meet about flea circus and all this this is theater. That was very Joe, and Joe was always trying to write a book about the theater. He loved the theater, and by the way, in real life, people might be dramatic, but they're not quite that witty, and that
right,
so it was a fantasy. It was always sort of a comedy of manners. It had that hyper reality or the hyper
yeah.
exaggerated element, which is, but you don't mind because you do feel sympathy for the characters. It's fun.
Oh no, absolutely. No, it's certainly heightened, and I think that's where great drama and comedy comes from. But as you said, the sympathy. I just wanted to read something he said in the book that I found really interesting about play about writing in general, because he said if All About Eve were nothing more than a story about an ambitious young actress, an aging actress, and a woman married to a playwright, we would have on hand a highly esoteric film with a very special appeal and of dubious interest to the audiences of the world. But we were particularly careful in telling our story never to let the external characteristics of our chief protagonists cover the universal applications of what they were as people: a young girl obsessed by ambition and a compulsion to realize that ambition, whatever the means and cost, a woman who is undergoing the most frightening transition in a woman's life from youth to middle age, with all of the anxiety and fear that accompanies it. And finally, the stay-at-home wife whose husband spends his professional life in contact with attractive young women, her realization that she may lose him at any time, her inability to combat her inevitable fate. Here we dealt with emotional stuff of which all women are made, and to which all women react and recognize, whether the symbols are actresses, nurses, queens, or whores. And he always was able to find these elements, whether it was a film noir or a melodrama or whatever, that spoke to everybody. So
Yes.
that's, I think, and I totally agree with him. I think that's what makes the best stories.
What's interesting about what the passage you just wrote was that Joe wrote it in 1950. I mean, he had that consciousness about women and roles. And, I mean, Simone de Beauvoir famously said, women are not born, they're made. You know, the female has to adapt to cultural expectations of what a female is. Joe got all that. Even so, he felt women, if they didn't have a husband and children, were not fulfilled. You know, he has the Bette Davis character say that somewhat. And in 1972, when the women's movement was sort of raising consciousness and putting words around these theories, he wrote a long introduction. His screenplay for All About Eve was republished, so he was able to bring these concepts forward 20 something years later, and yet he didn't live it.
Right. Yeah. It's like it's almost as if he admired it and agreed with it, but he just couldn't do it himself. Which
he
is
saw it, right? He saw it.
Which is really fascinating, fascinating contradiction. I like
was
that.
So sorry. Insightful. Yeah.
And, he was.
Oh, and also let me add one other thing
go ahead.
Baxter said. Women are like, in this interview, women are like glass. They can see us. You know, Joe can see us. Women are like glass to Joe. He can see our inside. So it would be hard to be involved with him romantically because he would know everything he wanted. So he really did observe all the time and so forth. So it was.
I imagine that was also part of his appeal, that women felt that he could, because as you wrote in the book, women just fell in love with this guy.
Yeah. Well, it's like, you know, transference. He was like, he was really interested in their thinking and getting to know them. And, you know, how it's like spilling your guts out to a psychiatrist and having him say, "Oh God, I love you. You're
exactly. Wonderful." Yeah.
So, yeah. And he liked it too. He was the amateur therapist.
Oh, yes, because he was, as you wrote in the book, he was really interested in psychoanalysis and Freud and things like that. Another thing he said about screenwriting, which I liked, is he wanted to have the audience included in having their various interpretations being more subjective as opposed to feeding them all the answers. And one element in this film that I hadn't thought of before, and I'm not sure if this was something you thought of, was that once Margot decides not to play Cora, and at this point, this whole story came out that Eve had trashed her in the press and everything. And she said, well, you know what? I'm too old. I just got to live my life. This is silly to live my life and be chasing all these parts that I'm too old for. And so they end up giving it to Eve anyways, which I could understand because you already saw Lloyd thought she was a great actor. And in that scene at the restaurant, he says, well, maybe she had good intentions. So he wasn't so angry at her as everyone else was. But then this whole, it suggested that perhaps there was an affair between them, but you're not so totally. Sure. Yeah.
Oh no, I absolutely feel. And interestingly, the story on which it was a magazine story originally.
That's right. Yeah.
In the magazine story, Eve and Lloyd run away together.
Oh,
he
really?
Divorces Karen. Yeah. Well, the Karen figure. And so Joe created Addison and he created Bertie. I mean, there might have been a maid, but you know, he created that whole character. So he made it more complicated in that way. I think we're absolutely meant to think that Lloyd is the only one with blinders on at that point. The other three, each one has a scene where they see Eve. I mean, the scene when Bette Davis is in bed having her breakfast and kind of quizzing Thelma Ritter, and then Eve comes in and silkenly, you know, sweet talks her, and then they look at each other with that Bette Davis and Thelma Ritter.
Oh yeah.
And when Celeste Holm, when Lloyd's saying, you know, I'm not making that much money, and it's a total non sequitur, and Celeste Holm, that's an interesting transition. So she's beginning to see.
That's right.
Evilness. Although again, it's when she and Eve, when Karen and Eve are in the restroom of the cup room, I guess they call it 21, Historic Clover 21.
Yeah.
And she goes back and forth between seeing Eve for what she is, but then being sympathetic, and then Eve, you know, grabs her hand.
Oh, that's a great scene. Yeah. That's such a great scene. What I like so much about that scene also, and I wonder if the actors happen to just do this, or if Joe specifically directed this in the blocking, was that as soon as Karen gets up, as you just mentioned, you just see Eve grabs her hand, and the rest of the scene until she leaves, she's holding it. It was almost like it was almost, it felt so threatening. That was something maybe I noticed it before, but I didn't remember it. But when I saw it, I thought that was just brilliant. That
It's in the script.
Is
that she
it?
holds,
Wow.
yeah, that she holds onto the hand. So whether or
Okay.
not she
Okay.
would have, Joe told her to do that.
Yeah. Okay.
But what
Yeah.
was not in the script is the candy at the in the bumpy night party, when she goes back and forth and she looks at the candy and she puts it down, because even then everyone was
Oh,
always
yes.
watching their weight.
Yeah.
And what that came out of was Bette Davis said, this is such a talky scene. I need more business. I need something to do.
Yes. Yeah.
And so he said, you go up to the candy on the piano or wherever it was, and you want it, but you keep going away. And then finally you take it and you eat the candy. And she goes, there's no candy. And he said, well, there will be. So that came out of a realization that she needed more action. And so she chomps on that candy. And then in the cup room, the Stork Club scene, she chomps on the onion,
Oh, with DeWitt. Yeah.
Right. So there's a chomping theme too.
Oh God, I love it. It just you when I'm watching his films, I almost want to write down all the lines because they're so delicious.
You can have it. It's and more about All About Eve, which maybe you can buy online.
The book,
It's got the whole screenplay. Although there's a few lines in there I don't think are in the movie. So maybe it was. I don't know if it was the shooting script.
Yeah,
I was going over it last night. And I don't remember those lines. So.
I'll have to read that. I do know that apparently I think it was mostly a pretty smooth shoot as opposed to but Bette Davis and Celeste Holm, they didn't get along too well, I believe.
Right. I don't know why. I mean, and then I've read stories about Bette Davis and Marilyn Monroe, Bette Davis being really mean to Marilyn Monroe. Celeste Holm said that Gary Merrill and Bette Davis were like two teenagers running off, like two teenagers with a secret.
Right.
I know when in the scene when Bette Davis, when Margot says she doesn't want to play Cora, and Celeste Holm does that laugh, I can't imitate it.
Oh yeah,
it's an amazing laugh.
Yeah.
And Bette Davis said, "I can't do that. How do you do that?" So evidently the tension between them was such that Joe had him do the scene again, so Celeste Holm could sort of do it again and sort of stick it to Bette Davis, which is interesting. Because all three of those major actresses had won Academy Awards, so there was a lot of talent to juggle and egos to juggle. So
I bet yeah. I love all of the performances. The only one I felt the actor who played Lloyd, I forget his name now.
Hugh Marlowe.
It's not that I thought he was bad. I just felt there was a degree of effort in his performance, particularly when he was getting mad. I thought everyone else I just thought were so organic. I don't know what you thought about him.
Yeah, he seemed immature to me. Like, I don't know how old he and Celeste Holm were. Well, I guess he was supposed to be older because the plot was that she was a junior at Radcliffe when he came to talk. So theoretically, he was older, but she had a wisdom and a maturity, and he seemed, immature.
Yeah.
But maybe that's what Joe wanted. I don't know. He was certainly the most credulous at that point.
I only read this morning, the woman who plays Phoebe at the end, Barbara Bates, she had quite a tragic life. I don't know if you know much about her, but she committed suicide in her mid-40s.
It's funny because I was just thinking last night, I know 3 members of the cast committed suicide: Marilyn Monroe, George Sanders, and I can't remember the third one. So you just answered that.
Yeah.
She was under contract too. She at Fox, so that's why they cast her. But I thought she did a good sort of Eve imitation in her little scene.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Her husband died of cancer, and apparently, but she had tried to commit suicide when he was sick, just because just really and I don't know if maybe she had some mental health issues, because apparently on set she was often a lot of erratic behavior and things like that. So I don't know, but I was just I didn't know anything about her, so I looked her up after watching the film, and I was like, oh God, like just so tragic. I couldn't help but feel. I mean, I love Marilyn. I love Marilyn in it, but I couldn't help but feel sorry for the character she plays, because I couldn't help but see Marilyn in her, like this woman that they're just sort of, who's sleeping around to get to the top because she feels that's all that she's like the bimbo, I was like,
Right.
oh God, this poor woman, they just no people were just not very fair to her, were they?
Right, right. Typecasting, and I
Yeah,
read that she was so nervous she was throwing up all the time, just like the character did.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But she did a good job, particularly when she goes to the audition and then she's throwing up in the washroom, just the way she stumbled out.
right,
I
right.
thought she was quite good in it. But like I said, everyone is really, really remarkable in this film. I think it's such a treasure. I think it was Robert Osborne from TCM, his favorite film ever. I
Really?
think,
I didn't
yeah,
know that.
yeah,
That's nice to hear. Yeah.
yeah. He had mentioned that in an interview. But I love it. Was there anything else about this film that you perhaps wanted to mention?
I can't think. Well, the music, it's interesting because the music, I had a very long, I in the archives, there was a very, very long memo that Joe wrote to the music director about composing music for it. And there were evidently, and I was trying to listen last time I watched it, themes for Eve. Each of them had a theme, which I really couldn't hear, but supposedly in each version, when they were having flashback, whether Karen was telling it or Addison, it would be oriented that way. You know, it'd be Addison's Eve or Karen's Eve, and so forth. And the so that was an element that you're just being acted upon. You know, you're not that conscious of necessarily. But at the party, when she wanted Liebestrom, when Margot kept saying, play it again," Joe said, "Don't just pick anything." When the pianist tries to play something else, pick something adult. So what he got was Stormy Weather, which was perfect. Right?
Oh yeah, because then it doesn't. Gary Merrill says maybe we should play something a little happier.
Yeah, where's the corpse?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
I love the
great.
party scene. Yeah, did you
Yeah,
have a favorite scene? I would be hard pressed to pick my favorite scene, but I suppose the
it's
bumpy.
very different. There's so many. I mean, the two that for me really, when I think about this film, I think of is the scene where Margot shows up and she's 2 hours late to do the audition with Marilyn Monroe, and then she finds out that Eve is now the understudy, and she pretends that she isn't. I think that whole scene is wonderful with every character.
She sweeps her coat across Max's face.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, just the details, the way in which she tears into anyone. Lloyd runs off. She breaks down at the end. Everything, Gary Merrill feels defeated at one point. He just goes and lies down. It would be tough between that one and then the one between Eve and towards the end in the hotel with
Yeah,
DeWitt. I think that scene is just a remarkable, beautifully
yes,
acted, and just
right.
and so twisted and dark. Just when DeWitt says, "I don't know why I want you. I think it's because you can't love anyone, and neither can I, and no one can love us either." He says something along those lines, and I just thought, wow, he finds her appealing because she's so empty. But those to me are the greatest
And when
scenes.
she says get out and he says you're too short for that gesture.
Oh right. I forgot about that. He hits her too in that scene. It was quite.
Yes,
I totally forgot about that
right.
when she laughed at him. That you really saw a menacing side all of a sudden. Because up until that point, I mean, yeah, you saw that he was, this witty, cynical critic up to no good. But then I thought, ooh, like he's got a dangerous quality,
Right.
which I found really appealing. But yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful film. I know that it's on the Criterion Collection. You could get it on DVD or Blu-ray, but it's been out, on DVD or Blu-ray for a number of years. I don't think it's on any major streaming service right now, other than if people want to see it or watch it again, it's on YouTube. You can buy or rent it there.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link, patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. Patreon is exclusive content that I create month in and month out. And as a subscriber, you are able to vote on polls and contribute to what I do on Patreon month in and month out. So head over to the link for full details. You can also leave a donation directly to my YouTube channel by pressing the thanks link, which you will find directly below the video frame. Just click on the thanks link and you can leave a donation there if you choose to. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes. Also click the like button and leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of this episode. Also, you can also share the episode. All of these things are what produce traction to my YouTube channel. So I appreciate you watching and thank you again. And I will see you in the next episode.